There are moments in global industries when the ground shifts quietly, so quietly that almost no one notices until the consequences are too large to ignore. And that's exactly what happened with Toyota. No dramatic announcement, no headline-grabbing press conference, no bold declaration of a new direction. Instead, the clues emerged like scattered puzzle pieces. Delayed U.S. EV rollouts, sudden momentum in Canada, whispers from Japanese financial reports, and shockwaves inside Washington. Before anyone could react, a picture began forming. One that suggested Toyota, the world's largest automaker, was no longer fully anchored to the United States. It wasn't an emotional decision. It wasn't political. It was structural, economic, strategic. And it was happening at a speed that stunned even insiders. The United States, once seen as Toyota's most reliable market, had slowly become a place where the rules changed without warning. Tariffs surged, costs spiked, incentives shifted, and EV requirements became a maze even America couldn't navigate. Meanwhile, Canada, quiet, steady, overlooked, built something that seemed almost tailor-made for a company needing stability. Critical minerals, refining capacity, predictable policy, and a direct corridor into the U.S. market. So today on Northern Pulse, we unpack how Toyota's small adjustments reveal a far bigger story, one that could redefine the EV future of North America for decades. Toyota didn't ring any alarm bells. It didn't warn Washington. It didn't publicly shift strategy. Instead, the first signs came from industry analysts who noticed something unusual. While Toyota's U.S. projects were stalling, its Canadian engagements were accelerating. Plants in the American South continued construction, yes, but timelines slipped, budgets grew, and key EV launches became uncertain. This wasn't normal for a company famous for precision and long-term planning. Then came the financial disclosures. Buried in quarterly reports were numbers that suggested Toyota was entering a defensive posture. Profitability warnings, cost spikes, tariff exposure. Analysts began asking whether Toyota was quietly preparing an escape route from the volatility of U.S. policy. It was around this time that Canadian media quietly reported Toyota strengthening ties with Ontario and Quebec. At first, it looked like standard corporate diversification, but the scale and speed were different. Toyota was locking into long-term arrangements, connecting itself to Canada's EV supply chain in a way that felt permanent, not experimental. By the time U.S. commentators noticed, it was already happening. Toyota wasn't walking away. It was hedging, placing its long-term EV foundation in a country that offered what the U.S. no longer seemed able to guarantee: stability. But the real shock came when the financial storm hit. The rupture began with tariffs, massive, sweeping tariffs aimed at Japanese exports. They weren't theoretical. They weren't political theater. They had the potential to hit Toyota with an almost unimaginable number: $800 billion in global exposure. Even if only a fraction materialized, it would reshape the entire company. Toyota's warnings were unusually blunt. They projected a 21% profit drop in 2025, devastating for a company built on precision margins. But the internal breakdown was even more alarming. $1.25 billion directly lost due to Trump-era tariffs. 745 billion yen, about $5.1 billion, lost to currency fluctuations. 350 billion yen, around $2.4 billion, lost to rising material costs. This wasn't a dip. It was a structural blow. Toyota produced 3.22 million vehicles in Japan and exported 542,000 of them to the U.S. If the U.S. became unstable, Toyota's entire global strategy would wobble. Washington assumed Toyota would stay no matter how chaotic policy became. But Japan's largest automaker couldn't gamble its future on political cycles and unpredictable trade battles. The numbers forced a realization. The U.S. isn't safe enough for long-term EV planning anymore. And then, As if on cue, Toyota's U.S. operations began unraveling from within. Toyota's Kentucky EV rollout, once a jewel in its U.S. strategy, was delayed until mid-2026. This delay wasn't random. It came from a perfect storm of U.S. complications: shifting IRA rules, unstable material costs, and an EV incentive system that changed faster than Toyota could adapt. The Tacoma's manufacturing path had to be reconsidered because of tariff complications tied to Mexican production. Each policy shift forced Toyota to redraw its supply chain map. The U.S. wanted to dominate EV manufacturing, but its policies created uncertainty instead of confidence. EV production needs long-term clarity, stable minerals, stable timelines, stable rules. America couldn't offer any of these. Even worse, many U.S. suppliers couldn't meet IRA compliance standards. Toyota had to search abroad for dependable partners, ones who could deliver both the materials and the predictability required for long-term EV operations. For an automaker, unpredictability is poison. Billions of dollars ride on decisions made years in advance. So Toyota quietly started looking northward, toward a place with fewer political mood swings. And that's when Canada stepped forward with something the U.S. couldn't match. While Washington fought tariff battles, Canada built infrastructure. Not speeches, not promises. Infrastructure. Ottawa invested $6.44 billion into critical minerals, nickel, lithium, cobalt, and prepared another $2 billion to expand extraction and refining. This wasn't symbolic. It constructed the backbone of a full EV supply chain. Then came the breakthrough. Canada became home to the only cobalt refinery in North America. This one development changed everything. It meant Toyota could get IRA-compliant cobalt without touching China, bypassing U.S. shortages entirely. Ontario and Quebec transformed into an EV supercorridor. Battery plants, mineral refineries, and component facilities began forming a tightly integrated supply chain, one that fed seamlessly into the Michigan and Ohio auto belt. Canada offered what Toyota needed most: predictable policy, refining capacity America lacked, materials that meet IRA standards, a government with stable long-term incentives. It wasn't about nationalism. It was about rational strategy. Toyota saw that every U.S. obstacle had a Canadian solution. That's when the quiet pivot began. Toyota didn't move its headquarters. It didn't shut down American plants. But it made a far more decisive move. It deepened long-term EV commitments in Ontario and Quebec. Fast. Toyota effectively created a Canadian EV shield, a zone where supply chains were protected from U.S. tariff blasts and political swings. In this zone, everything was predictable. Rules, incentives, materials, timelines. This wasn't improvisation. It was structural realignment. As Honda poured $15 billion into Ontario and GM invested $2 billion into Quebec, Toyota saw something powerful: momentum, a cluster effect. Every new facility made Canada more attractive, not less. Canada wasn't a backup plan. It was becoming the anchor of Toyota's long-term EV strategy. For a company planning 20 to 30 years ahead, Canada's stability outweighed America's size. But while Toyota found stability, the U.S. found something else: panic. The moment analysts connected the dots, U.S. panic erupted. States accused Toyota of abandoning American workers. Lawmakers feared that Canada could serve as a backdoor for foreign automakers to use Canadian minerals while still collecting American tax credits. The anger wasn't just economic, it was political. Governors who had invested heavily in EV readiness now wondered whether Toyota would ever deliver at the scale they expected. The delays in U.S. EV projects made them even more anxious. The paradox was impossible to ignore. The U.S. wants to dominate EV manufacturing, but its policies push automakers to Canada, where stability actually exists. Toyota didn't want conflict. It wanted efficiency. But America offered volatility, not certainty. And yet, the biggest realization was still coming. The EV race isn't about having the biggest market. It's about having the strongest foundation. Canada now has the minerals, the refining, the IRA compliance, the policy stability, the geographic integration, the investment momentum. The U.S. has the demand, yes, but not the structural reliability needed to supply it. Toyota understood this earlier than anyone, and other automakers are beginning to follow the same path. The EV industry doesn't chase chaos, it chases stability. Canada offers exactly that. Which leads to the question everyone keeps asking. The biggest question swirling across industry circles isn't whether Toyota still values the American market. It absolutely does. The real question is whether Toyota can continue building its future inside a system that changes direction every time political winds shift. And when you look closely at the signals, the answer becomes clearer. Toyota isn't abandoning the United States. It's protecting itself from the instability that now defines U.S. policy. What looks like a retreat is actually a long-term repositioning, one shaped by risk, regulation, and the need for absolute clarity in an industry where projects last decades, not months. Toyota knows that EV manufacturing requires stable rules, predictable costs, and a government that won't rewrite its policies every election cycle. But in the U.S., rules tied to the IRA change frequently. Tariffs appear and disappear without warning, and critical minerals remain trapped behind supply shortages that Washington still hasn't solved. No automaker, no matter how large, can bet its future on uncertainty. And Toyota certainly won't. So instead of gambling on chaos, Toyota is building a dual strategy. Maintain presence in the U.S., but root long-term EV operations in a country where policy is steady, materials are accessible, refining capacity exists, and the supply chain is aligned with real-world production needs. That country is Canada. This is why Toyota's shift north isn't a temporary hedge. It's structural, strategic, intentional. By placing its EV backbone in Ontario and Quebec, Toyota ensures that even if U.S. policies swing, its long-term plans won't collapse with them. It's a quiet evolution, one that strengthens Toyota's resilience while exposing how fragile the U.S. ecosystem has become. In the end, Toyota isn't choosing sides. It's choosing stability. And right now, stability lives in Canada. In the end, Toyota's shift isn't just a business decision. It's a warning shot across North America's economic landscape. For decades, the United States assumed it was the uncontested center of automotive power. Companies would build there because they had to. Markets were huge, incentives were strong, and political leaders spoke with certainty about America's manufacturing destiny. But certainty has a shelf life. And Toyota's quiet pivot proves it expired far sooner than Washington expected. When the world's largest automaker starts redirecting its long-term EV backbone into Canada, it tells us something deeper than quarterly earnings ever could. It shows that the true advantage in the EV era isn't about having the loudest speeches, the biggest subsidies, or the most dramatic tariffs. It's about having the one thing America lost: reliability. Canada built that reliability, brick by brick. Refining capacity, mineral strategy, predictable regulation, and a stable cross-border infrastructure that doesn't collapse every election cycle. Toyota didn't announce a departure because it isn't leaving, but it also isn't willing to tie its future to political chaos, shifting incentives, or supply chains that break under pressure. Instead, it found a partner that thinks in decades, not news cycles. A partner that connects the entire EV pipeline, from minerals to batteries to assembly. A partner that removes uncertainty rather than creating it. That partner is Canada. And Toyota's move is just the beginning. Other automakers see the same signals, the same risks, the same opportunities. The North American EV map is being redrawn, not with headlines, but with strategy. And as the dust settles, One reality is becoming impossible to ignore. The road to the continent's electric future may run through the U.S. market, but its foundation is being built in Canada.